Hi everyone, and welcome back to the channel. So this is a video that is going up on both of the channels, SC Crochet Studio and the Shania Lee Show. It will be up on the Shania Lee Show before SC Crochet Studio. If you're seeing this on SC Crochet Studio, it's up. We're getting into travel season, or we're about to get into travel season. So I wanted to put this out there as kind of a comprehensive knitting / crocheting tips while traveling. Tips for traveling while crocheting and or knitting. This is a comprehensive list based on a lot of looking into it and deep diving based on what people have recommended and people's own experiences. Now, I have yet to travel while being a crafter, while crocheting and or knitting, because I'm teaching myself how to knit now. I've yet to do that, but I am a reader and I have traveled while being a reader. So I understand from a reading point of view that sometimes it can be hard to narrow things down. One of the tips that I'll elaborate a little bit later on in this video is like selecting what to bring, like selecting which projects to bring, which projects to work on, what you're hard to bring. I totally understand the struggle, like I said, from a reader point of view. It's like, what books do you bring? Like, yes, you have audiobooks available and ebooks available, but like, what physical books do you bring? So I totally understand that struggle, and I know I'm gonna have even more of a struggle once I start knitting and crocheting during my travels. So a lot of the stuff that I was seeing, like blog posts and videos, were like 9 tips for doing crocheting while traveling, 9 tips for knitting while traveling. A lot of it was like in the 8 to 10 tips realm, usually around 9, but again in the 8 to 10 tips realm. I have like 18, so I have like double that, and I feel like hopefully this is somewhat comprehensive. It's not fully comprehensive, fully all-inclusive, but it is going to be pretty comprehensive. So with all of that said, let's get into this one. So first and foremost, this is mainly for, like, a lot of these are more airplane flight travel specific, but some of the later ones are, but it is a mix, and a majority of them are just generic crafting while travel, but quite a few of them are airplane specific. Excuse me. So the first one is to secure your scissors as best as you can. I know that I can't remember where I got these scissors, but there's a pair where like the actual scissor part. Okay, YouTube, this is just for demonstration, but the actual metal part of the scissors has to be under 4 inches. And do I have, I don't know where it is, but where's my little thingy? Okay, so I have a measuring tape here. That's kind of loud. So here's the inch side. There's 0. So because you have a little bit of the middle part there, I am counting kind of this part here. Well, it's all metal, but the actual like cutting part. So this is about like 2 inches, give or take. And I did look up the conversion, because if you use centimeters, it's probably about the exact 1-to-1 thing for 4 inches to centimeters is 111.76 centimeters. So probably about 112 would be your safe bet, 112 centimeters. So if you have, you can literally find these little scissors anywhere. There's a lot of options available in the TikTok shop. I think I got these on Amazon, but now we're boycotting Amazon. So TikTok shop, Etsy has quite a few options, and I think maybe Joann's or Michael's. I know Joann's is probably closed down by the time this video is up on a Crochet Studio, but Michael's might have some, but under 4 inches, under about 112 centimeters. So have a way to secure the scissors, like I said, and in that, like, I didn't finish that thought. And one of the sets that I bought, it came with a pair of scissors where it's like the actual blade parts are definitely under 4 inches, but it has like a cover as well. So if you can find something like that, like a plastic cover as well. So if you can find something like that, maybe that would be a good option too. And just in general, the next tip is to have backups that you can use specifically for travel. Like have plastic crochet hooks that you'll use for travel, have plastic needles you'll use for travel. If you want to play it safe, then nail cutters and floss cutters have been known to work as good temporary scissor replacements. The only thing I will say is to buy like a new nail cutter or a new floss cutter. Buy something that's completely new and don't use it except for yarn. I got this on Etsy. Excuse me. And I will only be using this for crochet because you don't want to dull out the cutter part by using it on your nails or using it for floss. You don't want to dull that part out. So try to have one that's specifically for your yarn and don't use it for anything else. And again, like have backups, like stitch markers. Where's the thingy? Where's my thingy? Okay, have backup, I have the word somewhere. Needle stoppers. Have backup needle stoppers. And it doesn't have to be something cute like this. They can just be like those rubber stoppers that you can get. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but just have backups and have ones that you'll use specifically for travel and specifically for your yarn. The next tip, the next trick is to take a look at if you're traveling by air, if you're going by airplane, take a look at that country's airport security rules regarding knit and crochet tools, especially if you're going international. Like, even if you're just staying in your country, like, double check, especially if you're going international, like I said. From the looks of it, most airport securities are okay with knitting and crochet tools, and you might get questioned about it, but most will allow you packets, if not in your carry-on, then in your checked. But again, just double check with the rules and regulations. You don't want to go in there not knowing and then have it be confiscated. So just take a look ahead of time. The next one is compression and vacuum bags for when you're traveling with a lot of yarn. And these work so well. Like, compression and vacuum bags just work well in general. But if you need to travel with a lot of yarn for whatever reason, compression vacuum bags are a great way to do that. So the next trick is to separate your active works in progress, your active whips, while you're working on them. Separate them from each other. Maybe have them in like separate little bags, and then label like, okay, this is my knitting practice, this is my granny square blanket, this is my cardigan. Label them and keep them somewhat separate, because then you'll have all the things that you need for those specific whips, where the whips are. So the next tip or trick is to do center pull when and where possible. I know that center pull sometimes gets annoying because you end up with the yarn guts. So this might be a good chance to consider investing in a yarn winder. And I'm currently using this yarn, but I did this on a yarn winder, and it has helped so much with using my yarn with the center pulls without getting yarn guts. And the way excuse me, here's mine. So the way I do it is, let me show you at this end, is I try to give, like you usually do have a good amount of tail from putting it in there, but I do try to have about an inch or so that's just hanging off like this, like an inch give or take, because then that'll make it a little bit easier to pull it out and start working with it when you're on the fly, whether or not you're in an airplane. So the next trick is kind of along those lines, is having a yarn bowl or having some sort of small to medium bag with a drawstring, because that can also help keep your yarn contained when you're using it. So there's that. The next one is needle stoppers for knitting. I've seen a lot of people say that also elastics, like rubber hair bands, maybe not scrunchies, but I have a scrunchie available, but like a hairband, rubber hairband elastic, or just like an elastic tie, not tie, but like a rubber band might help with that as well. But have like some sort of needle stoppers, and like I mentioned earlier, have backups, have like 2 or 3 things for it, just in case something gets misplaced, especially when you're flying. So the next one, kind of in the same vein, is to have stitch markers. This one is more so for crochet, but I think it can also be used for knitting as well to an extent. But have stitch markers for your crochet projects. Let's see, I don't have anything easily accessible, but essentially like you can put your like the stitch markers both to count how many like stitches you've done and to block it from undoing itself. Okay, I'm just gonna do this real quick just as a little demonstration. This is not the right thing for it, so not the right hook for this. I don't think it's working okay. I have a stitch marker. Okay, I thought I didn't have a stitch marker here. So what I do when I'm crocheting and I need a pause is I'll pull out the loop really long like this. Let's put this back. And then I thought I had a stitch marker here. Maybe you don't. Let me grab a stitch marker. Okay, have my stitch marker. Again, pull the loop wide and just put it in. And then there. So let's... Now, if you have like a thicker yarn, or if your loops are kind of loose, one might not be enough, so you might want to do 2. It's not coming done, and if it gets that close, you can just pull, and there you go. And again, like I said, you can double up if the yarn's a little bit on the thicker side, so there are ways to do it. So also sorry for like me pausing. I thought I had one on my desk, so that's why I was looking around a little bit. But the next tip or trick is to choose and or bring the easy patterns and projects, because you don't want something super complicated that, you know, you might not even have a lot of chance to really get into before the trip's over, depending on how long the trip is. So easy patterns and or projects, and maybe even projects and patterns that don't take a lot of mental power. So maybe you don't want to do something that's new or newer. You might want to do something that you're used to. So the next trick is to choose patterns, projects that are small to medium in size, and maybe not projects that would need to be stuffed with polyfill or stuffing, just because you don't want to be carrying around the stuffing, plus if it's not something you don't know If it's something where you don't know how much you need to stuff it, you don't want to just be carrying around a whole lot of stuffing. So small to medium projects that don't need to be stuffed. So no amigurumi, maybe no pillow stuff or stuff like that. So the next one is to choose something that has few to no color changes. So maybe you would want to choose a yarn that, if you want it to be multicolored, have a yarn that is naturally a color changing yarn, a multicolored variegated yarn, or just choose a single color for your project. So the reasoning for that is because you don't want to be carrying a whole bunch of yarn, a whole bunch of different yarns onto an airplane. That can be a little bit of a hassle. Like, looking at it from like a reader perspective, I don't want to be carrying around 5 heavy hardcover fantasy books when I can choose one and then choose 5 lighter weight paperback books. So kind of something like that, where it's like, you don't want to be carrying around a bunch of different colored yarns just to have a multicolored project, when you can choose a yarn that's already variegated and or just a single color project. So the next tip slash trick is, if it's a road trip, the simplest thing is don't craft and drive. If you're the driver, like, maybe if there's 2 drivers, then take turns so you can have a chance to do some crafting if it's going to be long enough for that. But don't craft and drive if you're the one driving. The next one is kind of just generally to start your project before you leave, because in that way you have some foundation of where to go, and traveling in general can be stressful. So having it already started is just like, okay, I can just continue from here. So start before you leave. The next one is, I know I said earlier, like, not to have a lot of yarn, but have some extra yarn for the specific projects you have. So if you have, depending on the amount of yarn, depending on the size of the skein or the cake, have 1 to 2 extra things of that specific yarn, lot color, the dye color, for the specific project or projects you're working on. And just like, that's just so you don't run out of yarn mid-trip. And again, it really depends on the length of your trip. So it's like, and the amount of space you have in your packing. So 1 to 2 things of yarn as needed. Sorry, I keep needing to pause. So the next trick, this actually might be 19, but whatever. The next one is, try not to do more than 2 projects on one trip, or try not to bring more than 2, because it can get a little bit confusing when you have yarn for 3 or more different projects, and then what's what, and then figure out time for 1 to 2 each. Like, when I'm crocheting, I usually, even though I haven't crocheted and traveled before, I usually have 2 projects on at once, like 2 to 3 on at once, where one project I'll take to work with me so that I can do a little bit of crocheting on my break. A second project is usually over out in the living room, so that in the mornings before I head out to work, I don't have to like transport the yarn back and forth between my room and the living room. And then sometimes I will have a third project by my bed, so that before I go to bed I can have something else there. And those are where those specific projects happen. So again, I don't have to carry the yarn back and forth, and I don't have to worry about putting it in and out of the bag. I just have those specific times for crocheting. So if you have more than 3 projects, it can get a little bit confusing on how to decide what to do when, where your attention should be, especially if you have other hobbies like me where you're also reading, and if you're doing like something at the beach, even though like crocheting or knitting at the beach might not be the best thing. I've done it once and it was fine, but just really keeping the yarn out of sand and sand out of the bag that your yarn's in. But if you're doing something at the beach or like doing something outdoors, like you might want to go interact with your environment. Like I said, for example, at the beach, like you might want to go out to the water a little bit. So, or if you're camping or if you're camping, you might want to go out on a brief hike. So kind of that's why I'm suggesting no more than 2, because that way your attention can be more evenly divided. The next prompt is to try to choose lighter weight yarns, because again, 1, it's lighter, and even if it's a lot of yarn, it tends to be not as heavy as the heavier weighted yarns, especially when you need a lot of yarn. So try to choose lighter weighted yarns. I would say no heavier than like 6, so like the blanket yarn. 1 second, I'm gonna pick this up carefully. So I think this is 6 yarn. It's Bernat blanket. I just sharpened my scissors, give me a minute. Okay, so that is Bernat blanket yarn in Forest Sage. And if it's something like that, that would be the biggest I would go. I wouldn't go for extra thick blanket yarn or jumbo blanket yarn. And then the next trick, I keep wanting to combine those words, is to have a bag for all your notions. Even if it's something as simple as a Ziploc, have something available for all your notions, the stitch markers, the needle stoppers, any measuring tapes you have, like any sewing needles. Have a little bag for that. And like I mentioned earlier, have backup stitch markers, have backup needle stoppers, have backup sewing needles. So have backups, have a little bag. Again, even if it's something simple as a small Ziploc snack pack. And the last one is to consider where you're going and what you'll need. Now this one kind of ties in with the airport one, to check their security regulations, but consider where you're going and what you'll need, both in general, what you need to pack, like clothes wise, hygiene stuff, and craft specific. So let's say you're traveling international, so you're going by plane, maybe by boat, and you need to have clothes, and maybe you want to bring like a blanket for whatever reason, or you want to bring the materials to make a blanket. So you need to kind of take that into consideration with what your destination is and everything you'll need for your destination, because when you're traveling internationally, you might need an outlet adapter. You might also need like a power strip for whatever reason. You might need extra chargers, extra portable battery chargers, portable battery banks. You might need extra water bottles. So it's like taking all that into consideration, as well as what you'll need for the project or projects you're bringing. Like maybe you only have enough space for yarn for one project. So it's like taking that into consideration. So that is it for this video. Thank you all for watching. If you have any tips or tricks, please leave them down below in the description. I did link a lot of the places that I was looking at and looking into for this video. That's down below in the description, as well as the list for these tips and tricks. So again, if you have any others that I didn't cover, or if you have any other reasonings, or maybe something a little bit different than what I said, comment down below. I'd love to hear. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video.